Joey. All right. Hello out there, everyone in the tubes of the internet, and welcome to another exciting edition of This Week in Space. My name is Joan Emerson Bell. I'm a tarot reader and astrologer. What's up, Ash? How you doing? Nice to see you, my friend. Um, yeah, this is my show. I like to come here each and every Monday, for the most part, to bring you all the astro weather that you need to navigate this week in space with a little style and a little grace. And we are coming into the very last weeks of December, closing out 2025, which I'm pretty grateful for. And two's a party, so or two's company, so I'm glad that I'm in good company with you, Ashley. Yeah. Before we get into the astrology of the week, I want to let folks know that I will be co-facilitating a dreaming intensive in Epidavros, Greece. This is going to be for the spring equinox coming up in April. I think it's the 15th through the 22nd. So if you're interested in that, check out dreammysteries.org. There is a link in my bio on Instagram, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes on the YouTube and the podcast. Um, what else? What else is important to talk about? Oh, I also do an astrology themed radio show called The Melee Report, which I'm trying to get back in the swing of doing. The next episode will be coming out for the Sagittarius new moon, which we'll be talking about in this week's report. So if you want to get your astrology with less talk, more rock, check out the Melee report. You can find it under Camp Wizard Camp on SoundCloud. And yeah, throw a link to that in my stories on Instagram. Also, I've been coming out with a Spotify playlist, and I know Spotify kind of sucks, but people have been asking me for it, so I'm trying that out as well. So keep your eyes peeled as we move through the week. Should be out for the Sagittarius new moon. And then last and certainly not least, I am not only somebody who shows up on the internet to tell you about the astrology of the week, but also I am a consulting astrologer and tarot reader. So if you're interested in getting a tarot reading or an astrology consultation, hit me up. You can find me on my website, campwizardcamp.com, or DM me on Instagram, send me an email, reach out, put something in the comments, and we can find a time to work together. Uh, and Lauren, I'm sorry that Instagram is making it weird. I think Instagram also kind of sucks, but I'm glad that you're here. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to this week in space. We're talking about the week in space from December the 15th, 2025, through December the 21st, the solstice, the winter solstice, 2025. So, kicking us all off. Today, Monday, December the 15th, we have Mars entering into Capricorn. So Mars is coming off of a square to Neptune, which was exact yesterday, Sunday, December the 14th. And Mars-Neptune contacts can be kind of draining, and they can leave us feeling a bit confused around where to direct our energy. However, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. And so this Saturn ruled sign helps Mars to really focus and channel their energy. And Capricorn is focused on achievement. It's all about climbing the mountain. And the sort of goal-oriented nature of Capricorn helps Mars to really know what to do and where to put their energy, which I think can be really helpful because Mars, left to its own devices, is just like cruising for a bruising, looking for a fight, looking for conflict and challenge, and might not have the best sense of how to really direct that energy towards a longer term goal. And I think the Mars into Capricorn into their exaltation helps Mars to really know where to take action and how to show up with courage for the challenges that are presented to us. And Capricorn really helps us to have a sense of what the goal is so that Mars can show up and take action and direct their energy in the service of achieving those goals. Capricorn also helps to provide a structure that helps Mars to channel and direct their energy, which can be really helpful, especially after Mars just completed this square to Neptune, which may have left us feeling a bit confused and low energy. And so, yeah, having a little structure and a little focus helps us to get back in the game and really consider how to take right action and really where to put our energy. Okay, Tuesday, December the 16th. Mercury leaves their retrograde shadow at 6 degrees and 51 arc minutes of Sagittarius. So Mercury entered its pre-retrograde shadow on October the 21st of 2025 at 20 degrees and 42 arc minutes of Scorpio. And then they stationed retrograde on November 9th at 6 degrees and 51 minutes of Sagittarius, where they will return to tomorrow, Tuesday, December the 16th. Mercury had their Cazimi on November 20th at 28 degrees and 18 minutes of Scorpio. And this was during that pretty fraught and intense Scorpio new moon. So if you want to think back to late November and maybe some of the insights or issues that we were struggling with then. And then Mercury stationed direct on November the 29th at 20 degrees, 42 arc minutes of Scorpio. And then Mercury is leaving their post retrograde shadow today, Tuesday, December the 16th, um, at when they reach that 6 degree 51 arc minute moment in Sagittarius. So now it's like a little overview of Mercury's retrograde journey. And now that they are moving forward and covering new territory for the first time since November the 9th. And so, as Mercury moves into new ground, we get a chance to consider how we can integrate the lessons that we received during Mercury's retrograde and how to apply them to the situations that we are encountering as we move forward. Mercury deals with our thought processes and our communication. So, how might this recent retrograde adventure help us to evolve the ways that we process our reality and the stories that we are narrating to ourselves about our experiences? And how might this bring new awareness to the ways that we communicate? With Mercury with Mercury and Sagittarius, we are also looking at issues of belief and truth, which are some Sagittarian themes. And so here are some post-retrograde questions to consider. How might our belief system have been altered or updated by this past Mercury retrograde? And how might our understandings of what is true been impacted by the retrograde? And how can we bring that new awareness with us and apply it to the situations in our current lives? And how has the time of reflection that was asked of us during Mercury's retrograde be applied to what we're moving towards and the ways that we process and communicate our current experiences? Okay, moving along to another transit on Tuesday, December the 16th. We have the Sun in Sagittarius squaring Saturn in Pisces. This is occurring at 25 degrees and 28 arc minutes. And just a heads up that the square, the Sun and Moon will be squaring Saturn and Neptune during the new moon. So we're sort of building the energy towards the new moon, starting off with the Sun squaring Saturn. And so Saturn is a planet of maturity, responsibility, and pressure. The sun is our inner spiritual wisdom, the light that burns within us, and that kind of motivates us to take action in the world. The sun is also our identity and what we aspire towards. So, with these planets in square, they are at cross purposes. They are trying to figure out who goes first, who's leading. Their agendas are sort of in conflict. And so the responsibility and weight of Saturn can feel like it might be blocking us from achieving what we aspire towards. Saturn can weigh us down. Saturn is also limitations and the limitations of reality, which may feel like they are preventing us from being or expressing ourselves or shining our light to its fullest. And this can be really frustrating. And it's a challenging experience. Saturn can also be depressing. It's heavy and it's cold and it seeks solitude and austerity. However, depression causes us to slow down and to really notice. The pressure of Saturn causes us to get in touch with what is most important and most vital in our lives. When we're just cruising along and everything is working great, we don't really need to pay attention or to consider our inner world or our depths as much. But when we hit that wall, when we find ourselves depressed, when we are called to really pay attention to some part of us that is calling out for help or needing something to shift. And this is the gift of Saturn. It applies pressure to our lives, which forces us to connect with the innermost authentic parts of ourselves. And this is how we turn the lead of Saturn to the gold of the sun. And this is a alchemical process. And by slowing down and connecting with our inner spiritual wisdom and those parts of us that are the most authentic, we can use Saturn to help us create foundations and structures, scaffolds and skeletons to help that light shine into the world. And when we can integrate the demands of Saturn with the calling of the sun, we can develop systems that allow us to burn more brightly and to achieve the things that we aspire towards. And another component of this transit is authority. Saturn is external authority, and the sun is our inner authority. And again, in a square, these two versions of authority are at cross purposes. And at its heart, a square seeks integration. And so, questions we can ask is, how have we outsourced our authority to external figures like teachers, bosses, politicians, parents? And we can think about the benefits that we have received from this outsourcing of authority. One of those is being able to let go of personal responsibility and having somebody else to blame. Oh, it's their fault, it's not working, or it's their fault or the system's fault that my life is not going how it should. It's because they haven't disclosed alien encounters, or like they haven't released the Epstein files. That's why I can't live my life to the fullest. Right? This also provides a distraction from our internal worlds and our need to be present with ourselves because it's somebody else's fault. So reclaiming our authority also means reclaiming our responsibility and no longer having external forces that we can blame. And this is some Saturn shit right there. Taking responsibility for our lives and for ourselves. I also want to be clear that there are systemic and structural issues that impact people at various levels, and that's very real. However, it's also important to recognize what we do have agency over in our lives and being able to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions within that without giving our power and presence away by outsourcing our authority to external systems. And as we call back our authority, we also are called to step into our responsibility. And I think that is something that is being asked of us from this transit at this time. So we might want to consider the ways and places that we have outsourced our authority and the ways that we can call that back. Because it is these places where we have given our power and our agency away. And oftentimes, these are the places where we're looking for some external force to save us or some outside situation to change that so that we can be all right. What this does is prevents us from looking at ourselves and the internal issues that might be contributing to our current situations and dissatisfactions. So how can we step into taking responsibility for ourselves and our lives without needing to be rescued by something else or placing blame on things that we have no control over? Which, don't get me wrong, like that feels great, but I don't know how helpful it is in the long run. And this transit asks us to consider how we can own our experience and take ownership of our lives within the Saturnian structures of the realities that we find ourselves in. which moves us along to Thursday, December the 18th. And oh, actually, I'm gonna skip this one because we have a lot to talk about. But on Thursday the 18th, we have Venus in Sagittarius, trine Chiron in Aries at 22 degrees and 42 arc minutes of those fire signs. Unfortunately, I'm gonna skip that because yeah, we got a lot to talk about. Moving along to Friday, December the 19th, we have the new moon in Sagittarius, which is going down at 28 degrees and 42 arc minutes of Sagittarius, the most philosophical of all of the signs. This new moon occurs at 5:43 in the PM Pacific time, making that 8:43 in the PM on the East Coast. So, couple transits to just be aware of, which for the most part we're covering a little bit more in depth during this program, but these are some of the major transits that are going to be active during this new moon. So we have Venus pretty close to a conjunction with the new moon. I believe Venus is at 24 degrees of Sagittarius. Um, we also have Venus squaring Saturn during this new moon, and the new moon is right in between Neptune and Saturn, sort of enclosed by them, which is a bit challenging because both of those planets are a tad fraught, shall we say. We also have Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, who is square to Chiron, our centaur buddy. So, new moons are a time of new beginnings. It is a time when seeds are planted in the dark and a new vision is born. This is a time when we cannot yet see what has begun, but we are trusting our intuition to help us navigate in the dark and creating space for this new vision to take root and to develop over the next lunar cycle. Sagittarius is about the integration of the logical human half, the human part of the centaur, with the intuitive animal body, the animal part of the centaur. And, with this new moon, and with a new moon in general, like the kind of logic doesn't apply in the same way because we're not able to see. So we really have to trust in our intuition. And so while we are seeking to integrate the animal and the human rational logical part, I think in our fast-paced modern world, there's a lot of emphasis that is put on the rational, logical part of ourselves, and to the detriment of our intuitive wisdom. And so part of the reconciling of the human and animal or the rational and intuitive is maybe needing to lean into the intuition and into the instinct a little bit to help us to navigate in the dark. And when these aspects, the intuitive and the rational, are in right alignment, they help us to take aim at the targets that we are shooting for. Sagittarius is a hybrid symbol, right? And a hybrid sign, double-bodied, mutable, that uses the technology of the bow and arrow to achieve its goals. It uses the hybrid of the animal and the human to take aim at the goal and to chase after the intention that is set. With this sign, we are learning to honor both the animal intuitive part and the human logical rational part. And with this new moon, we can consider the ways that we are able to bring these parts of ourselves into right relationship and to consider what each of these parts might need in order to work together and thrive. So this is a time of setting intention around the targets that we are shooting at. Right? Sagittarius is an archer. They like shooting at targets. They like chasing after their arrow. And so we might want to consider what is the goals that we are setting ourselves? What are the targets that we are aiming at? What would we like to shoot at? And what would we like to chase down over this next lunar cycle? And how do we know when we have achieved our goals so we are not running, so we're not compulsively shooting and running and shooting and running? As a raging Sagittarius, this is something that I've been working on my entire life, is this desire to shoot the arrow, chase after it, pick it up and shoot it again without taking a moment, retrieving the arrow and recognizing, where am I? What have I achieved here? What is the scenery? What is the quality of this target that I have hit? Where do I find myself and can I enjoy it instead of this sort of compulsion to keep running and doing and moving on to the next? Because turns out we end up sort of not wasting, but missing a lot of life if we are so mono focused on the arrow without thinking about the bigger picture. And I think this is also part of the situation with Sagittarius is in order to hit a target, we need to have that narrow focus. We need to be have our eye on the prize. However, once we have achieved that or hit our mark, can we go and enjoy the success or the achievement or the place that we find ourselves in without just racing to the next one? And so another thing to consider is what are the ways that we can come into connection with ourselves so that our aim can be true? And I think part of this is recognizing where we're at when we reach the arrow and resetting ourselves before we choose a next target. And what are the beliefs that are important to us so that they can help us to direct our aim? What are the truths that we hold dear that can help us to direct our arrows? And we'll talk more about the other transits during this new moon as we move through the show because they're all happening this week. It's all happening right now. But one thing that I do want to note is the Saturn Neptune square can create some confusion as to the right target to aim at. And so this may require some checking in with ourselves and connecting with our inner wisdom and our animal intuition to help us to take aim over the next month. Neptune can also bring a sort of what's the point type of vibe to the party. And so reconnecting with our beliefs and inner truths can help us to find an orientation point to take aim from. And the Saturn square to this new moon can bring an increased sense of pressure and a sense of limitation. And this can feel very frustrating, especially to the free spirit of the Sagittarius. However, Sagittarius has this natural sense of optimism that can kind of help us overcome the perceived limitations that Saturn brings, especially if we believe in ourselves and the potential positive outcomes of our action. And so, when taking aim at our target, it can be really helpful to envision the successful outcome of our actions, which can help us to achieve our goals. This creates a kind of mental pathway for our physical form to follow. And with this new moon and this kind of seed planting moment that it brings, it can be really helpful to imagine our success and our achievement of hitting whatever target we have set for ourselves in as much detail and with as much clarity as we can, so we can live into that vision over the next lunar cycle. This brings us to Saturday, December the 20th. We have the Sun in Sagittarius, perfecting their square to Neptune at the spooky old anaretic degree of Pisces. This is going down at 29 degrees and 24 arc minutes. So, Neptune is dissolving, and the Sun has a lot to do with our vitality. So, in this square with these planets at cross purposes, we may find ourselves feeling drained and kind of low energy. Neptune is also foggy and confusing. We may kind of lose the plot a little bit and feel lost or adrift in the sea of life. And this can feel a bit overwhelming, especially in a culture where productivity is king and we always need to be on our game. And so we may find ourselves feeling unable to show up for some of the demands of life, which may be a call to slow down and chill out if we can and not beat up on ourselves if we don't feel like going to every event and Christmas party and going shopping and all of that, whatever. This will not last that long, which I think is great because the sun will move into Capricorn the next day and be out of sign of the square by the end of the week. But this transit can bring with it a sense of futility. Neptune deals with the kind of interconnectedness of all things and the idea that everything is one, which I think is kind of beautiful. However, if everything's one, then what's the point? Why do anything? Everything is just nothing. It's all interconnected. It doesn't matter. However, the sun is our own individual and unique sense of self and ego identity. And so when these planets are at cross purposes, the sort of longing to return to the source and the interconnectedness of everything that Neptune brings challenges the physical reality that we are experiencing as individuals with our own desires and needs and inner worlds. How do we integrate the sense that we are all one while having an individual and unique experience? And I think this is maybe like one of the fundamental questions of life. And how do we maintain a sense of purpose and meaning while holding the understanding that we are all part of a larger fabric of the whole? Neptune is also dissolving and assimilating. And so that individual ego identity can feel like it is softening or dissolving, which is not always a good thing because it can really challenge our sense of self and our sense of meaning and purpose in the world. And it can also really challenge our experience of reality, which can be very dysregulating. And while I believe that we are all ultimately one, we are here and embodied and having individual experiences which are really important to live out. And our egos are what helps us to maintain a sense of self, which is pretty vital to that mission. And I know that there's a lot of talk in spiritual communities about like kill your ego. And I don't know if that's like really necessarily the best thing. And while ego death and personal evolution is important, I don't think we want to just abandon the ego identity because I think that it's unsafe and also like pretty unrealistic. Neptune can help us prevent the ego from becoming too rigid. I think it's important to be flexible and mobile and malleable. But we also want to maintain a connection to that core sense of self that the sun represents. And it's important to maintain focus on our goals and the mission that motivates us in this life without holding them too tightly or completely abandoning them. I think one of the best stories about Neptune is the Odyssey. And in that story, Odysseus is motivated by his aspirations to return home to Ithaca, to his wife and family in his homeland. And all throughout that story, Neptune throws up challenges to pull him off course and confuse him and make him abandon his mission. And many of Odysseus's sailors fall prey to these traps, getting befuddled or lost or being drowned or turned into pigs or thrown overboard. And without that strong sense of self and the assertion that the sun provides, we can very easily lose our way. And while this transit can help us to purify our aspirations and help to remind us that we are the divine having a human experience, we are still a human having this experience, and that is really valuable and should not be taken for granted or tossed overboard. So, with this transit, we want to also consider the ways that we are able to navigate when we find ourselves lost in the fog and we don't have a clear location of the sun to help us orient to. So, how can we wayfind when we lose sight of our orientation point, when the compass goes haywire? Just something to consider as we move through the week, and something to practice as we move forward through the foggy seas of this Neptunian square, which is also active during the new moon. One last note, Neptune can be delusional. So be aware of things that sound too good to be true because they probably are. Neptune can bring in misinformation and miscommunication as well as downright fraud. So check your sources before you commit yourself to anything under this transit, please. Things are foggy with Neptune and things may not be what they seem. So you want to let that fog kind of clear for a few days before charting any course that you will need to commit to for the long run. Because what it looks like today may not be how it actually is a few days from now. Neptune can be pretty idealistic and can see things through rose-colored glasses. And so I would wait until the sun is in the more practical-minded sign of Capricorn and out of sign from the square before signing anything or committing to anything big that you're going to find yourself involved in for a long period of time. All right. Also, Saturday, December the 20th, we have Venus in Sagittarius, square Saturn in Pisces. This is going on at 25 degrees and 37 arc minutes of these mutable signs. So, Venus is relational and likes to socialize. Saturn is a curmudgeon and likes isolation and solitude. Saturn's like, turn that music down. Venus is like, I'm doing karaoke. I love this. Saturn's like, turn it down. People are trying to sleep. Venus also likes nice things and likes to enjoy themselves. And Saturn is about poverty and austerity. And our challenge with this transit is finding ways to integrate these opposing energies. So, how do we have a good time on a budget? Is a really good sort of Saturn Venus square. How do we take time for ourselves while and like be able to lean into solitude while also maintaining our connections with others? Right. So this transit may make it hard to relate to others, or we may find blocks around socializing or connecting with other people. Saturn deals with commitment and dedication, and we may find ourselves questioning who and what we are dedicating our energy towards. Venus deals with values, and with this square, we may feel increased pressure or isolation, which may call into question our value system and if we are living up to those values. We can get good information about ourselves and our relationships, as well as our value system, from the pressure that Saturn applies during this transit. And we can get a deeper understanding of where we are choosing to dedicate our energy and if something needs to shift in order to put us into better alignment with ourselves and our value system. This can help us to reconsider how we are relating with other people. And this can help provide a reality check on our relationships and how we are in connection with others. We can also see if our interactions are actually bringing us joy and fulfillment. And we can see the places where interactions feel more obligatory or might be feeling unfulfilling. In this case, we might need to take some time to consider what needs to shift and where we want to dedicate that energy. One positive outcome of this transit is that Saturn is about boundaries and limits, and Saturn can help Venus to develop better boundaries, which is really important work. Venus likes to have a good time and to be in connection, to spend money and to feel good. And these are all great things, but without clear limits and good boundaries, our energy can just totally leak out. Without good boundaries, we can feel drained from over socializing, upset if we are doing things we don't want to do, and regretful if we overspend. Saturn helps us to have a container and to know the limits of that container so we can better hold the joyful energy of Venus. Because a square is a hard aspect, we may find some tension between what we want to do and what we have to do. We may find ourselves bumping up against our own or other people's boundaries. Things may feel lonely or constrained, but this is an opportunity to recognize what the limits are and how to work within them, or to renegotiate the boundaries and limits so that we can feel heard and contained while being able to experience pleasure and the joy that Venus is so good at. And I think that boundaries also help to support our values. And in my mind, values are created by the Venusian qualities of what I like and what I don't like. In real talk in life, we have to do things that we don't like. It's a bummer. We have to be around people we don't want to be around. We have to engage in things that are not fun. It sucks, but that's life. However, within that reality, we have choices and we have agency. But if we don't have strong boundaries, then we end up engaging in situations and activities that are not actually what we want to be doing. By having good boundaries, we get to have more agency to choose where our energy goes and what we engage in instead of having our choices made by other people and, external forces. So, while this transit and the limitations that it brings may feel uncomfortable or even mildly depressing, it is a good opportunity to recognize the limits of what we are willing to give and receive, and to use this knowledge to create a structure that helps us to have more of what we want moving forward. Which brings us to Sunday, December the 21st. Starting off Sunday, we have Jupiter retrograde in Cancer, squaring Chiron retrograde in Aries. This is occurring at 22 degrees and 40 arc minutes. And again, Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, so this square will also impact the vibe of the Sagittarius new moon. And so, with this tense relationship between Jupiter and Chiron, there can be wounds related to overindulgence and over optimism that become revealed. Jupiter is kind of a party animal and likes to indulge, and Chiron is the core wound that might be revealed through overindulgence. It's the hangover after the holiday party, or even having optimistic expectations that aren't met and led to disappointments and resentments. And I've heard it said that expectations are premeditated resentments, meaning that when we have expectations of things that are outside of our control or expectations for things to go a certain way, and when they do not turn out that way, when they don't turn out the way we want or people don't behave in the way we want, it can lead to disappointment and anger, which can turn into frustration and resentment, which is not a great feeling. And so this is the holiday season. I don't know if you've noticed by all of the incessant Christmas music everywhere, um, which, can be a time of increased expectations. And we have expectations about how our families and friends and our loved ones are supposed to show up and behave. We can have expectations about what we are supposed to get for the holidays or how other people are supposed to respond to the gifts that we give them. And all of this is completely out of our control, especially if we don't communicate our expectations to others. And when our expectations aren't met, it can create feelings of disappointment, which again can lead to resentment. And with Chiron in the square to Jupiter, it can bring us down a road of all the times that we felt disappointment and create stories around how our needs and expectations are never met. And because the holidays are such a charged time, little experiences in the present can activate unhealed wounds from the past. And it can bring us right back to the time in childhood when we felt disappointed or unheard or unseen or our expectations weren't met. And this can be incredibly painful. However, these memories provide us with important opportunities to heal ourselves and our past. Chiron is a healer as well as a teacher, and Jupiter is a symbol of belief and wisdom. So we can ask ourselves, what is the wisdom that we have gained from our past? And how can we turn towards ourselves and our inner children with care and compassion and hold them as we have some core wounds that may be reactivated during this holiday season? And how can we allow the space for inner children to have their experience while also turning towards them and providing the wisdom of the wise adults that we have become to support and care for them? We may have expectations of the holidays based on past experiences, either good or bad. And how can we cultivate the wisdom to see clearly how things are now and to show up for these situations honestly and without expectations that they will be any different from how they actually are based on how much we want them to be a certain way? And I think when we create these stories, I had this one Christmas and it was perfect, and I imagine it's going to be like that again, and the situation is completely different, and we go in expecting it to be like it was in the past, while not recognizing the conditions of the present, that is a recipe for disaster and resentment. However, when we can see clearly, okay, this is the situation that I'm getting myself into. How do I support myself through this, and how do I care for myself through this? I think we are better positioned not only to have a good experience in the present, but also to care for those parts of ourselves that may be feeling some type of way. So we can consider what are the ways that we are able to care for and support ourselves as we move through these experiences, which allows us a greater capacity to show up for our loved ones as we move through this holiday season. Um, Let me just check the comments real quick before we get to our last transit of the week. Yeah. And Astrology by Moonlight is saying that situations don't cause suffering. Our attachment to how things should be cause the suffering. And I think that's really true. It's the stories that we make up that create the suffering. And, if we can try and be present with how things are and just let those stories go a little bit, then I think that it can reduce some of the suffering that may be encoded into the holiday experience. So, also, Sunday, December the 21st, we have the sun entering into the Saturn ruled cardinal sign of Capricorn, which means it is the winter solstice. Yay! This occurs at 7:03 in the AM Pacific time, making that 10:03 p.m. Eastern time. So, my friends, this is the shortest day of the year and the time when the Holly King is at his full power. In the in it is the in the eternal battle between light and dark. The winter solstice is a time when the Oak King is born and will grow to defeat the Holly King at the spring equinox. And with the birth of the Oak King, the light begins to return back to the earth. And after this longest night, the days begin to increase little by little until we return to the supremacy of the light at the summer solstice. And the battle begins again as the Holly King is born and begins to grow in power to defeat the Oak King once again at the autumnal equinox. And we ever so slowly descend back into the darkness. And we continue to go round and round and round. But on this darkest night, as the sun moves into the Saturn ruled sign of Capricorn, we find ourselves at the bottom of the trough, the longest night and the shortest day. So during this time, we are surrounded by darkness in the natural world, and the earth appears to be dead and dormant. With the lack of natural light comes the internal darkness and sadness and depression, the spiritual darkness brought on by the forces of control and those who seek to consolidate wealth and power at the expense of all other life on this planet. These are bleak times for sure. As in these times that humans have come together traditionally for centuries to light candles and gather around fires and to share food and warmth and to help call back the light into this world and to help kindle the light in each other's hearts and souls. So, with the winter solstice, we can also think back 6 months ago, if you can, to when the day was at its longest. And during that time, ideally, we soaked up the light and held it in our hearts, kind of like a battery, so it could burn bright within us and be shared during these dark times. And this is the cycle of the world. During the darkest night, we can hold to some of the darkness and depth that the night brings. And while we share the light that we have stored with those around us to help kindle the flames in those that we are close to, and ideally all humanity, we can also bring with us some of the solitude and internal reflection and the rest that the night calls us to experience and carry that with us as we move into the next turn of the wheel. And so I want to do a little callback because during the summer solstice episode, I told the story of Balder the Beautiful from the Norse tradition. Balder was the son of Odin and was the most beautiful and radiant being in the world. His mother Frigg loved him so much, she tried to protect him from any harm that could ever befall him. So she extracted an oath from all gods and mortals and living beings that they wouldn't harm him. However, the only being that did not was not asked for the pledge was the mistletoe tree because it was didn't seem like a threat. However, Loki, the trickster, finds out through a little subterfuge that the mistletoe hadn't signed this pledge. And so he carves an arrow out of the mistletoe, which he gets Balder's blind brother, Horder, to throw at Balder. And the arrow flies true and hits Balder in the neck and kills him instantly. And the bright, shining child Balder dies. Frigg is distraught. Odin is bummed out. So Odin rides into the underworld and asks for Balder to be returned and resurrected because the earth misses his beautiful light. The queen of the underworld, Hel, asked that if said that if every being in all the worlds would weep for Balder, then he would be returned to the earth. And in the Norse story, and I think that this is kind of interesting, in the Norse myth, all the beings in all the worlds weep for Balder, except for Loki, the trickster, who refuses, and Balder stays in the underworld. And this is what gets Loki imprisoned in the center of the earth with a snake dripping poison in his eye on a regular basis, which is sort of what brings on Ragnarok, which is the sort of Norse apocalypse. And I think I want to mention this because the Norse mythology was all spoken. It was, never written down, and it was just stories shared by bards and passed around. When it becomes written down, it is written down by Christian monks. And I believe that they maybe sort of altered the Norse mythology with a bit of a Christian bent, taking away some of the pagan ideas that offended their Christian sensibilities. And I'm bringing this in because this idea of a linear progression towards Ragnarok or apocalypse is a very Christian idea. This is not anything that traditional or pagan or earth-based cultures ever believed in because the earth doesn't function in that way. The earth functions cyclically, right? The change of the seasons moving in a cycle, the lunar cycle moving in a cycle, everything moving in a cycle. And so, I think that this idea that Balder stays dead and this is an event that brings us to the apocalypse is maybe a kind of modern Christian adaptation of an older, more earth-based way of understanding the cyclical nature of the world that we live in. And so I bring this in because this is sort of the moment that we find ourselves in with the winter solstice. The weeping and mourning for the light, for Balder the Bright, that has been lost and appeared to leave the earth and is trapped in the underworld. And with our mourning and weeping for the light, we are calling for the light's return. And I think this is an important aspect of the solstice. It is not just about the burning of candles and fires and a practice of sympathetic magic that helps to call the light back to the earth, but it is also the mourning of the loss of the light and to show our appreciation and longing for the sun to rise again and for the light to return to us. And so I'll end with this. A colleague of mine said this really beautiful thing recently. They said that the holidays are a time when our boundaries shift, and we want to make sure that we are not unconscious about how these boundaries change. And I think that this, holiday festivals and holidays are a liminal time where boundaries do change, but we want to be very aware of how they are changing and if they are changing in the ways that we want them to. And I think this really tracks with this time of the year because the day after solstice was the Saturnalia in ancient Rome, and this was a time when Saturn was honored, but honored in a very interesting way. In the celebration of Saturnalia, boundaries shifted and laws were abandoned, and parties would rage on all night, and social orders were inverted. Kings would be paupers, paupers would be kings. This is a very kind of like carnival or Mardi Gras vibe. And during this time, statues of Saturn, which had chains around them, the chains would be loosened and the social order would shift during this liminal holiday. And the archetypal psychologist, James Hillman, talks about this in an essay that he has about the Senex and Puer. And he says the Saturnalia provided a destruction of hierarchy, law, order, and time. It brought back the golden age, which Saturn presided over. All borders down, lust released, denials and caution to the wind within the limitations of the game, within the Saturnian limitations of, okay, this is the liminal space that we're in. And so, like, anything goes in here. Hillman goes on to say the Saturnian power was honored with anarchy and propitiated from hardening into its despotic tendency. The rigid structure of the complex cured itself, so to speak, by providing for its own destruction. He continues Western culture no longer uses these homeopathic cures. Instead, we attempt to break down the Senex, or Saturnian power, from without, introducing violence to topple structure. These attacks upon it merely reinforce the ruling complex by increasing the rigor of its laws and the vigor of its order. When Saturn forgets its form of renewal through its own asocial and anarchistic fantasies, it loses one side of its structure, becoming one sided. By banning breakdown, is ensured. I think that this is really interesting in the sense that, we think of Saturn as a rigid structure, and limitation and pressure. However, being able to honor Saturn by abandoning that structure for a while is what Hillman talks about as a homeopathic cure, so it doesn't become so rigid and so oppressive. And while, we don't necessarily have control over the external Saturnian forces, we can think about, okay, what are the ways that I might be able to do this in my life through this festival time, and allowing the rigid structures of work or, my daily routine to shift and alter. But how do I stay conscious of this and not just get swept up in the holiday rush? And I think it's really important to engage in ritual meaningfully and not just the ritual of capitalism or sort of going through the motions of a Victorian Christmas idea or going through the empty gestures of the holidays, but to be very intentional about how we alter the structure of our lives in order to honor the Saturnian power that brings these structures and limitations that really holds us. And so, as the sun enters into the Saturn ruled sign of Capricorn, we enter into this liminal time of the holidays. And there is a need to renew an internal order through the abandoning of external order and the breakdown of structure. However, again, we want to be conscious about how these structures break down and how our boundaries shift during this liminal time so we're not hijacked by other people's agendas. And we don't want to just go shopping because that's what we're supposed to do, or go through the motions of empty holiday rituals because that's what we're supposed to do. We want to be conscious of the ways that we move and shift in this liminal space of transition and allow the breakdown of existing orders to support the order that we want to create for ourselves. And to plant the seeds that we want to harvest when the wheel turns again and the light is on top once again. We want to engage in meaningful rituals that support life and support the life that we want to live and to share the light that we want to carry on into the new year. And with that, my friends, I will bid you a fond farewell. Thank you so much for tuning in to this exciting episode of This Week in Space. Again, my name is John Emerson Bell. I'm a tarot reader, astrologer. I do astrological coaching, and I'm also a licensed mental health counselor in the land of enchantment. So if you are finding yourselves at a loss and needing a little support and guidance during these trying and turbulent holiday times, please feel free to hit me up. You can find me on Instagram at Blind Stallion Space Wizard or at my website, campwizardcamp.com. Just drop me a message and we'll find a time to meet. Also, I want to say that tarot readings and astrology readings make great Christmas and holiday presents. So, yeah, if there is somebody in your life that you're like, "Ooh, you would really benefit from this," let me know and we'll hook them up. Also, if you know other people who would benefit from this practice, send this along to them. It comes out on YouTube under Camp Wizard Camp. It also comes out as a podcast under This Week in Space with 3 exclamation points. So yeah, send it along, spread the word. I'd like to get the message as far and wide as it wants to reach. And so if you could give me a hand with that, it'd be much appreciated. Anyway, be well, my friends. And until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. And as always, may the force be with you. All right. Bye now.